Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm coming to you today with something that I think will help you very much. I get asked very often, what is the best place to start? How much should I eat? What should my calorie intake look like? How many grams of protein, carbs, and fats should I be eating? And I'm gonna give you something that I think is gonna really help simplify all of that. And the only thing you need to know, okay, is your body weight. So I'm gonna tell you guys 1.25 grams of protein per pound of body weight. All you need to do is know that. Obviously, multiply 1.25 times your body weight. So I'm gonna use myself as an example, right? So for myself, I currently weigh 270 pounds. Times 1.25 grams per pound of body weight gives me 337.5 grams of protein per day, which is pretty reasonable. If I multiply that times 4 calories per gram of protein, that tells me that on a daily basis, I would be deriving 1,350 calories from protein. Easy. Okay, now what I'm gonna recommend to you is to simply start off getting the same amount of calories from each macronutrient. I know a lot of you have heard, you should be consuming more carbohydrates than protein, and more carbohydrates than fat, all different conflicting stuff. Personally, I don't think any of that is really warranted. I think that all 3 macronutrients are valuable. I don't see the need, at least right off the bat, to have more of one than another. I think 1 to 1 to 1 is a great place to start. And if you then feel, you know what, I don't think I quite need all this fat, I could shift some of this and maybe increase my carbohydrate intake, or vice versa. So, you know what, I don't need all these carbohydrates. Let me increase my fat intake a little more. Some of us do a little bit better with increased fat. Some of us do better with more carbs in the diet. So if you know that based on that 1.25 grams of protein per pound of body weight, you're driving X number of calories per day, which for myself is 1,350. If we're gonna do a 1 to 1 ratio, that also means that I would be deriving 1,350 calories per day from carbohydrates. And because carbohydrates also have 4 calories per gram, you'd be eating the same number of grams of carbohydrates as you would protein. So now to calculate the fat intake, right? Because you can't just have the same number of grams of fats, because fats contain 9 calories per gram. We would divide 1,350 calories, divide that by 9, which tells you you'd be having 150 grams of fat per day. So roughly 340 grams of protein, 340 grams of carbs, and 150 grams of fat. That would give us a total amount of calories per day of 4,050. Now, as a check, right, to this, to make sure this isn't just completely off, plug it into a BMR calculator, right? Your basal metabolic rate, which would tell you, and of course this isn't exact, it's a little bit different for everybody. We all have different metabolisms, our activity level is a little bit different, but some of the good BMR calculators allow you to put in, your height, your weight, your age, your activity level. And if I do that, okay, what I came up with, now, if I put in that I'm moderately active, right? And I take place in exercise or sports 3 to 5 days a week, that tells me that I would need 3,750 calories per day. I'm probably a little bit more than moderately active 3 to 5 days a week. I do cardio daily, I train hard with weights 4 to 5 days a week. So if I were to put in that I'm working hard 6 to 7 days a week, that tells me I need 4,100 calories. So somewhere between 37 and 4,100 should be about right. And we ended up just around 4,000 for my body weight. So I think it's actually pretty accurate. And of course, this is to serve as a starting point. A very solid starting point though. I mean, this is, I think, in my opinion, pretty on. And this would get most of us probably 80 to 90% of the way before, you'd have to really fine tune things or really mess with the diet a lot. But let's talk food sources, right? You're saying, okay, I now know how many calories I should be consuming each day, how many grams of protein, carbs, and fats I should be taking in, but what am I gonna eat? Well, I laid out before you guys here a bunch of different foods that really, if I were to pick what I would need, to comprise my diet, this would be essentially all I would need. Don't need much beyond this, and this actually might even be a little bit more than what's needed. But to give you guys an idea, right, and let's start with protein because that's what everybody's always thinking about. Obviously whole eggs, you could, if you're trying to manipulate the protein and fat ratio, you could, put in, let's say, a couple whole eggs and, take the yolks out of some and put a greater proportion of egg whites. Personally, I like whole eggs. I don't like consuming egg whites. I don't digest them as well. I feel that I digest eggs much better when they're whole. And obviously the fat and the cholesterol, very important, the cholesterol is very valuable. It's beneficial. A lot of times people say, well, what about cholesterol? Is that something I should be worried about? Again, as we get a little bit further along and more studies come out, the association or the link between dietary cholesterol intake and actual blood cholesterol, it's being shown that it's not very strong. Red meat, great protein source, obviously. For any of you guys out there with a little bit more experience, you've had a controlled diet for a period of time, generally you'll be able to note that you're a bit fuller and a bit stronger when you've got red meat in your diet regularly. Doesn't have to be every day. At least a few times a week, I think, is the bare minimum. Chicken, for most of us, chicken is a go-to because it's high in protein, it's lean, it doesn't taste too bad, it's cheap. Another thing not shown here, fish. I'm a huge fan of fish, especially a fish like cod, because it's light, it's flaky, it digests easily. A lot of the higher fat fish, salmon is very common. Unfortunately, most of the salmon that you see is going to be farm raised. So the fats contained in it, not going to be quite as beneficial. But if you have a meal, like I said, like say cod and rice, then you would add some fats to that, whether it's something like olive oil, great fat, because it digests well. It's been shown to actually, people who consume it regularly tend to burn more fat. It's good for your liver. Something like nuts, very high in monounsaturated fats. Walnuts here actually are a little bit higher in polyunsaturated fats. They're a little higher in omega-3s, but something like almonds, high in monounsaturated fats, all very, very good. Also, peas, something like peas, beans. People ask a lot of times about legumes. What about those? I say great. Not shown here is rice, but we've got some cream of rice. But if you were gonna have just the traditional rice and beans in conjunction with a piece of fish or a piece of chicken, that's a great meal, okay? Let's talk carbohydrates. Now, there's a lot of discussion about gluten. A lot of people feel that they have gluten sensitivities, intolerances, etc. And in that case, the best thing to do would be to opt for gluten-free carbohydrate sources, such as, rice, cream of rice. Oats typically are gluten-free. The only reason people with gluten sensitivities will shy away from them is because of cross-contamination. Potatoes, unlike the other things I've shown here, they're actually a vegetable rather than a grain, so they tend to digest very easily. They're very high in minerals and vitamins. Does it matter whether it's a sweet potato or white potato? No. Sweet potato, though, is going to be a little bit higher in fiber, which for most of us, that's a good thing. Here's farina, which is a wheat-based cereal. But it's a little easier to digest because it's essentially very processed, which is something I want to talk about. People talk about processed things and is that bad, right? For example, farina. From my perspective, no. I mean, it's not like we're bringing in additives and preservatives and chemicals or artificial things. Wheat that has been processed, the only thing that it really does is make it easier to digest. And a lot of times people will ask me, well, what about something like sugar? Is sugar terrible? Now, I'm not going to say make sugar the basis of your diet. Absolutely not. The only reason that sugar is not really great is, number one, it digests super quickly. So if you're using it, obviously none of us are going to sit down and have a meal where we're going to have chicken breast, some nuts, and then a side of sugar, right? We're not going to do that. But if we're going to have, say for example, it's breakfast time and you're going to have some whole eggs and you choose to have some cream of rice cereal, is it wrong to add, a tablespoon of sugar to it? In my opinion, no. I don't think that's a bad thing. The only thing negative you could really say about sugar in that instance, we're only having a small amount, only a small percentage of our carbohydrates in that meal are coming from sugar. We don't have to worry about the rapid digestion of it because all the fat contained in the eggs, okay, it's gonna slow it down. So it's not like we have to worry about spiking our blood sugar or sending our insulin through the roof, anything like that. Now, fructose is not an ideal carbohydrate for a bodybuilder because it is not easily stored as glycogen. Glucose, on the other hand, yes, it's readily stored as glycogen. Something like dextrose, which is entirely glucose, that's great, but of course none of us are gonna get some dextrose and put it in our oatmeal in the morning. But a simple carbohydrate combined with a more complex carbohydrate as part of a meal that's also containing proteins and fats, all it is just makes it easier to digest, okay? Absolutely no problem with it, in my opinion. Let's talk vegetables, right? Because this is something that I think are very, very important and a lot of bodybuilders underconsume. Broccoli, I mean, that's kind of a bodybuilder go-to. Both broccoli and kale are both cruciferous vegetables, which have been shown to help prevent cancer, lower estrogen levels in the body. More than anything, they're concentrated sources of nutrition, right? They're loaded with vitamins, minerals. They help improve your digestion, keep your digestive tract clean, keep you regular, keep things moving. Very, very, very important. I think it's great, for bodybuilders as part of a meal, whether you have some steamed vegetables, whether it's some steamed kale or some steamed broccoli, or you choose to make a salad, you have some lettuce and carrots and, some olive oil and vinegar. Great. You should be having that with every meal. Okay, vegetables, very, very important. People ask oftentimes about fruit. What about fruit? And again, kind of like what we just discussed, because I don't personally believe that just some, a little bit of sugar is bad in the diet, and obviously fruit, whether it's bananas, pineapple, they do contain, all fruits contain a significant amount of sugar. The question is, what is the composition of that sugar? So, something like an apple, which tends to be very high in fructose, is probably a little bit less ideal. Whereas something like pineapple, although it is high in overall sugar, it's primarily glucose, okay? It's a very low fructose fruit. It also has the added benefit of being loaded with enzymes. Having a small side of pineapple as part of a meal, not a bad thing. My advice would be to steer clear of really high fructose fruits. I think if anything, it's just a more readily digested carbohydrate source, but as long as it's part of a meal, we don't have to worry about rapid digestion because it's gonna be slowed down by the proteins and the fats in that meal anyways. So all it's gonna mean is easier digestion. In all of this, discussion about protein, carbs, fats, all these food sources, I would be remiss if I didn't mention good old water. Now, this is something that so many people overlook, okay? Yes, it's just water, but let's keep in mind, you could probably go for about a month without eating, but you could probably only go for a few days without drinking before you die. So that should give you an indication as to how important, realistically, how much more important water is than even all this food we're discussing. So get started, right? Using the foods that I've shown you here. How do you know how many grams of protein and calories and fats, etc. in a piece of steak? Find a good online resource. nutritiondata.com is a really reliable one. I use that. That'll tell you the amount of, say, protein, carbs, fats. You could look it up, on a per ounce basis. So figure out your diet. And once you have your diet figured out, generally it's good probably to break it up between 5 and 6 meals a day. You don't want to be eating too much at a sitting, and you don't want to be eating 8 times a day because you'll be eating into the midnight hours. See how it goes, right? If you start losing weight rapidly, then you probably need to add a bit more calories, right? And you can just add it evenly from each macronutrient source. If you're putting on weight rapidly and it's not good weight, knock it down a bit. If you get going and you say, geez, man, this seems like a lot of carbohydrates. I don't think I need all these carbs, and I'm actually craving fat. Then don't be afraid to lower your carbohydrates and increase your fat intake. But starting with a 1-to-1-to-1, it's very balanced for most people. And I've been doing this for years, not only with myself, but I work with a lot of people. And I start most people this way. And most people generally say, man, I feel good. I don't have cravings. I feel balanced. And it makes sense that they would. So this is really what I advocate to you guys. Look, it's simple, it's direct, it's easy to plug in. And like I said, all you need to know is your body weight. It's all you need to get started. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you try it, and I hope you have success with it. Stay tuned for more videos, and I'll see you next time.